So you can also be more playful in some of these shapes, and we're going to show you some watercolor techniques to give each section a little bit different texture. Remember that what we did up here, where we're trying to keep everything wet as we're painting one section, is called a wash because it's a flat area of color. Okay, the first technique I'm going to show you is wet on wet. So I'm going to take my clean wet paintbrush and I'm going to go ahead and fill in my section, okay? So I'm going to pretend like I'm painting, but I'm just painting with water because I'm trying to hydrate the paper. So I'm still trying to be really neat with this because in just a moment, I'm going to add my color and you'll see what happens. So now that I've gotten that entire shape wet just with regular water, I didn't use any pigment on it. Now I'm going to get some pigment on my brush and show you what happens. So when I touch the brush that has paint on it to the water, you can see how the water just kind of like how the paint bleeds.
Scatters.
Yeah. Okay, and I can do this a couple places all over. Okay, I can also take one of the colors in my color scheme that's analogous or close to it. Oh, this one's super dark. And mix it in with here. Now you do have to be careful doing this because automatically your eye is starting to be drawn to this section because there's the most pattern going on here. So I need to be careful not to go too crazy with this because I still wanted my area of emphasis to be up here with the warm colors, but this will give you some nice variation. Another really cool technique that you can do is just with salt. You can either use coarse salt or fine salt, just like table salt. Kosher salt works really, really well, or like the salt pretzel salt works really, really well. Depending on the size, crystals depends on how your technique is going to come out. So with the salt, what you do, I'm going to do this. Oh, I just dipped my brush in salt instead of water. Let's try that one more time.
Yeah, you don't want to dip your brush
do
in the
that.
salt. I was wondering what was happening.
I thought it was water because I usually use those as water cups. That's cool. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to take the same color, and I don't want to put it in a shape that touches it, just so I can have a little more variety. So I'm going to do my wash inside this shape. Again, I'm holding my brush like a pencil. I'm leading with a point and dragging my puddle of watercolor. Let's get a little more on my brush. And you can turn your paper whatever way to get you a better angle. I'm right-handed, so I always like to paint left to right. You do you and figure out what works best. Ooh, that's okay. Okay. So now I'm blending in the different areas. I'm kind of using a gentle circular shape just so I can kind of get rid of any brush strokes because this part on the left started to dry.
So you can see why you have to work really fast.
Okay. So now that it's wet, I'm going to take some of my salt and sprinkle it over this section. You can kind of see what's happening, that this pigment in the paint is being attracted to the salt. So I'm going to let this dry like this. And once it's completely dry, I'll be able to flake the salt off and I'll be left with all of these little speckles all over the artwork. We want to show you two other watercolor techniques that you could use to add some visual texture to your artwork. One of those is called a graded wash. We already talked about how to do the flat washes, but a graded wash fades from one value of the color to the other. So how I'm gonna do a graded wash is I'm gonna start by getting the full amount of color on my brush. And I'm gonna start where I want the darkest part of my graded wash to be. Okay. Then I'm just gonna dip my brush in the water. I'm not swirling it around or anything. And I'm gonna overlap a little bit and pull it down to the next section. Dip my brush in water, overlap a little, and pull down to the next section. Dip brush in water, you know, same thing that I've been saying. Okay, and now you see how the value has started to go from dark to light at the bottom. I have a little bit too much water down here, so that's another reason why you have the paper towel. Hopefully, if you're at home, you have better towels than these boo-boo brown ones. Tissues, toilet paper, that'll work too. Okay, so I was just trying to lift some of that water because it was gonna leave all that texture down there. Okay, and then there's my graded wash. You might notice that some of my watercolors that I've mixed are starting to separate, or they might dry with some interesting textures. Like this one's gonna dry because the pigments are gonna separate a little bit. That's okay, that's how watercolor is. You wanna try to control it and get it to be smooth, but it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Another watercolor technique you can do is called lifting. So for this, you will need a crumbled piece of paper or crumbled tissue or something. So you're gonna start by just doing a regular wash in the section. Let me try to get a little more pigment on there. Okay, so I have my wash. Get that corner, that's annoying. Okay, then I'm just gonna take my paper towel, I'm just gonna crumble it up, gonna press it to the surface and lift it to get a really cool texture. I'm not scrubbing the surface or doing anything crazy. I just pressed it and lifted the paper towel.